guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my first drive video on this Audi RS6 Avant Performance. Hopefully you've seen my first look video that I filmed on this back in May. I go through the differences between the regular RS6 and this new Performance Edition trim. If you missed that, there'll be a link to the video up here somewhere. I've had this car for the past 6 days and covered 1,200 mixed miles in it. And that includes sitting in London traffic, blasting it down German autobahns, driving it along some of the most beautiful and scenic roads that surround the Nürburgring, and for the past couple of days, driving it on some of UK's best and worst roads. So I feel like I know it really, really well. It starts at £109,500 for the base trim model, which this particular one is. Audi Sport have saved almost 50 kilos in removing some of the sound deadening from inside and sticking these beautiful 22-inch milled wheels on it. Although on this base version, they are optional. They're standard on the carbon black and on the flagship Vorsprung model. Aside from the weight saving, Audi Sport have also played around with a lot of the software. So we have faster shifts from the ZF 8-speed automatic gearbox. We have a tweaked rear diff, we have tweaked rear axle steering. So all of those should hopefully add up to an RS6 that is dynamically more exciting and more enjoyable on the road. And in here we'll find the familiar 4-litre V8 twin turbo, except they've turned the boost pressure up a fraction and it now produces 630 horsepower and 850 newton meters of torque. So when you combine the fact that it weighs almost 50 kilos less, we have quicker shifts from that ZF 8-speed automatic gearbox, tweaks to the rear axle, and that extra power and torque. Well, this 2-ton RS6 Avant is now capable, apparently, of doing the 0 to 62 sprint in just 3.4 seconds. It will also go on to a limited top speed of 174 miles an hour. And we'll put both of those to the test shortly. First things first, let's test out this car's claimed acceleration figures. Audi say it will do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 3.4 seconds. That's 0.2 of a second quicker than the regular RS6. Now I've tested that long-term RS6 that I had along this very piece of tarmac in similar sort of weather, and the time that I got out of that car was a 3.28 to 60 miles an hour. So that's what I want to try and beat today as a like-for-like comparison. I'm in RS2, so everything is ramped right up. The suspension is in its stiffest setting, and it needs that because this car really squats when it's under hard load. I have got traction control etc switched off as well because it's not going to need any traction aids in this weather with Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system, and my left foot is hard down on the brake. Here we go, loading it right up, launch control program activated, and off we go. Oh, it's so fast. 3.08 seconds. That's painfully close to 3 seconds flat to 60 miles an hour. Wow, that's fast. And that is exactly 0.2 of a second faster than the RS6 non-performance that I tested along here. Unbelievable. The way it launches is so much better. It's making up all of that time in the first 10 meters. It's just ballistically fast. That is so impressive. Now let's take it out on the road and see what it's like as a driver's car. See what it's like dynamically. As talked about on the outside, this car has a claimed and limited top speed of 174 miles an hour. I was on the German autobahn a few days ago and I actually put that claim to test. So let's head back to then and see what this car is capable of. you enjoyed that clip. As you can see, well, this car was sitting at an indicated 176 miles an hour, and it could sit there comfortably all day long, providing the road conditions would let you. I'm in no doubt that this car, with the limiter taken off, would nudge 200 miles an hour. It's an absolute beast, and you could feel that limiter kick in the second you hit that indicated 176 miles per hour. When the RS6 and the RS7 were announced at the back end of last year, I had a good look through the official press release from Audi Sport, and something that was mentioned on there was the fact that this car would ride on Continental's Sport Contact 7 tyre, which I've heard, I've never personally used it, but I've heard is an incredible ultra high performance tyre that's very good in the wet and the dry. So I was quite intrigued to try that tyre, especially on this car, but unfortunately this press car, along with a couple of customers' cars that have already been delivered and already messaged me on Instagram, have all been delivered on Hankook's Evo 3 something or other tyre, which I have seen on the regular RS6 in the past. Now, speaking to my good tyre expert friend, he says these tyres aren't a bad tyre, but they're not on the same level as the Conti Sport Contact 7. And strangely, I've also heard that the RS7 Performance in the UK at least are being delivered on Pirelli P0. So again, not the tyre that they're meant to be delivered on. It's very unusual for a manufacturer to specifically say what tyre is going to come on the car. Normally they would say or similar, but the fact that it was in their press release is bizarre, and the fact that it hasn't turned up on the car, I'm guessing maybe there's a supply issue or something. But maybe in the future I'll try one of these on the correct tyre, and I can feed back to you and let you know if it does feel even better. And that brings me nicely onto the handling of this car. For the very first second I got behind the wheel of this in the centre of London in 20 mile an hour traffic, it didn't take me long to feel that there was differences underneath me. It definitely felt like it was more alive, it felt more responsive even at those really slow speeds. To me, I feel like I've got a bit more steering feel, but maybe I'm imagining that. I did give that long timer back about 2 months ago, so there has been a fair amount of gap between them, and I've been driving mostly my M3 Touring in that time, and we all know that the G-Series M3s and M4s just don't have much steering feel, so it is definitely improved over my car, but it does feel like it's a little bit better than the regular RS6. Now, a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that we're on these milled 22-inch lightweight alloys. Remember, they're 5 kilos lighter a corner, and all of that weight is unsprung mass. So it really comes alive, especially when you're doing 50, 60 miles an hour or more. It does feel like it is a bit more alive, but that also could be to do with the tweaks that they've done with the rear differential and the rear steering. And it certainly looks like the front axle has a bit more negative camber on it, and that again would back up the feeling that I'm getting of the car being far more direct. The downsides of that is at higher speeds, this car definitely feels more nervous, and that's usually what happens when you set a car up to handle better at the limit. You do sacrifice some of its calmer characteristics at slower speeds, but it definitely feels good coming into a S-bend like this. It's not quite up there with something like my M3 Touring, but it really feels incredible, and in fact I'm struggling to stay in this seat. But something you notice very quickly is some tyre sound. You can hear those Hankooks moaning and crying a little bit when the chassis etc still feels like it has loads more left. Again, a few days ago, I had a chance to take this car down a beautiful and quiet German equivalent B road, I guess you'd call it. So let's just cut back to there and you can hopefully enjoy that little clip of driving. I actually had a mic positioned down near the exhaust, but hopefully it will give you a good idea of what this car is like when you're pushing it a bit harder on a public road, albeit a silky smooth German public road. Next thing to talk about is that mighty 4-litre V8 twin-turbo engine. We've already discovered it produces some mighty acceleration times, and it will smash into that 174 mile an hour limited top speed. But what's it like in real life? What's it like compared to the non-performance tune? Do you notice that extra 30 horsepower and 50 newton meters of torque? You actually do, and I'm surprised that I can feel that difference. And again, I felt it the second I put my foot down when I left London. You can feel that extra thrust. I think especially the torque. And remember, this is also about 50 kilos lighter, which isn't a massive amount when you're talking about a car that's just over 2 tons, but it is still a substantial amount. And when you take 50 kilos away and you add 50 newton meters of torque, well, that power to weight ratio certainly goes up a notch, and you can definitely feel that. To me, it feels like it has more power and torque everywhere, just a little bit, but when you're really up in the rev range, well, it's a complete ballistic missile. And as we discovered in the 0 to 60 test, I think that it's much quicker off the line. Maybe they've recalibrated the launch control so that it sort of boosts up a bit more down there and gets you off the line. But if anything, once you're above 80, 90, 100 miles an hour, that's where you really start to feel the gains of this car. That's going to be next to useless here in the UK, but when I was out in the German autobahns, wow, I mean, it's just really, really quick. And I know, seeing drag races from Carwow with the M3 Touring and the regular RS6, well, there's basically nothing between those two. I am convinced and certain that this would be quicker than an M3 Touring over the quarter mile, probably a couple of tenths quicker. And you would hope that it would be, because, well, it's now producing 120 extra horsepower, and it actually has 200 newton meters more than my M3 Touring, which is a massive chunk. And you feel that everywhere. That's a big, big plus point for this engine in this car, and something I talked about when I compared the regular RS6 with my M3 Touring is the torque from this engine. You just don't get that in BMW's 3-litre S58. In any gear, I'm in 5th gear here at 40 miles an hour, put my foot down, there's 50 and there's 60, and then at that point everything's just starting to pick up and fire you down the road. It is so fast, it really, really is. And something else that helps make this car feel like it's even faster than the regular RS6 is the sound. Now, as far as I know, they haven't tweaked the exhaust or anything, but remember, they've taken 25 odd kilos of sound deadening out of this cabin between, I'm guessing, us and the engine and us and the exhaust. So you hear a lot more exhaust sound. You get some great overrun. Let's see if we can get... Oh, it sounds so good. It's almost like they've removed most of the OPF filters, but they haven't, as far as I know, played around with any of that. It's literally the fact that there's less padding, if you like, between us and that wonderful exhaust at the back. And you do hear more intake sounds. You even hear the occasional diff sounds. So it's no M3 CSL or M4 CSL as it is these days. It's not quite that stripped out, but it's definitely a bit more visceral in here, and it makes for a nice change compared to many modern cars today that are so insulated from the outside world. I get the good things in here. I get that engine sound, that intake sound, the exhaust sound. Listen to that. This thing is just so fast. I mean, you would expect that, wouldn't you? When you look at it on paper, you would expect it's fast. Did we need an RS6 performance? No. But isn't it great that Audi Sport offer one in this day and age? It really is going to be one of the last of a dying breed. We'll just quickly run through some of the negatives I've found with this car in the 1200 miles that I've had it. The standard steel brakes are not brilliant. They're good enough, but they're not brilliant. And I'm wondering if that's because this car is still relatively new. It had 1,000 miles on it when it was given to me. It's now done 2,200 miles. The next slight negative are these seats. They're not as good as the seats that are in an M3 Touring. They're not bad. They're reasonably comfortable, reasonably adjustable, but they don't sit low enough and they don't support you quite well enough. I wish that you could have got Audi's carbon buckets that are in their RS4 competition and cars like their RS3 performance, but you can't. The next thing is the throttle pedal. I complained about that a fair amount of times with my long termer, and they haven't really improved it. Yes, it is maybe a slight bit more responsive just because the turbos have been turned up and there is a bit more power and torque there to play with, but it's still a bit of a dead feeling throttle. And in terms of actual throttle response, well, throttles that are in the C7 RS6 and RS6 performance, the predecessor of this car, I mean, that's a much better throttle. So I'm guessing and thinking that it's always down to something to do with emissions testing, and it's just a pity that the throttle kind of lets this drivetrain down a little bit. My last negative, again, is something that's in all C8, A6s, S6s, RS6s. If you don't have the soft closed doors, which I believe are standard on the Vorsprung trim, these doors just don't like to close. It's not because they're not aligned up properly, it's just to do with the cabin pressure. If you crack a window or you have the boot open or a sunroof open, they'll close no problem. But if everything is closed, you got to close the door, and it needs a good slam to close it. And it's such a shame because door closing is definitely one of Audi's strong points over the years. In fact, most Germans, Audi and Volkswagen in particular, have always had a nice door closing, but on this particular generation, you have to slam the door a lot of the time to make sure it's closed, because otherwise it just sits there on the latch. But that's all the negatives I could come up with for an otherwise brilliant piece of kit. What's my conclusion? Well, Audi Sport have improved an already brilliant package. I'm a big fan of the C8 RS6, and I was very lucky to live with that long-termer for 3 months during winter. It was a fantastic car, and it was one of very few recent press cars that I really missed when it went back. And bear in mind, I have an M3 Touring sitting on my drive at home, but the RS6 had qualities that car just doesn't have, and vice versa. What have they done with the performance version? Well, they have improved on that already brilliant package. It retains everything that the regular RS6 has, but they've sharpened up and improved on its performance. So, a bit of a giveaway in the name. And yeah, it's not just the label, it definitely feels dynamically better. It definitely feels a little bit faster. So you do get more go for your slightly more money. I think it's about 10 grand like for like. And providing you go for these wheels, which are optional on this base model and something you have to tick, I mean, surely nobody disagrees that they look better. I think they look fantastic. And like I said, you can feel that lack of unsprung weight straight away. Is it as good as the M3 Touring dynamically? No. It just doesn't have the ultimate chassis. It doesn't have the front end that an M3 has. And not many cars do have the front end that an M3 has. And in fact, the only car really that I think compares to it is the current 992 GT3 with its double wishbone front end. Everything else that I've driven at least doesn't quite have that front end. So it's a massive benchmark for a car like this to beat, especially on a chassis that's getting old now. But what is important is Audi have certainly bridged that dynamic driving gap or driver's gap between the RS6 and the M3 Touring. And this car certainly feels more exciting down your favourite road because of those small tweaks they've done. So I take my hat off to Audi Sport for giving us this car in the first place, because I'm sure, as with so many of these ridiculous high-powered combustion engine only cars these days, it must be hard to get past the board and get signed off. Am I still glad that I've got my M3 Touring? Yes. I mean, it's a big difference in price, around £30,000 like for like in terms of options. And as we just talked about, the M3 is still dynamically better. It is arguably more exciting down your favourite road, and the driving position and the optional carbon buckets alone would sway me towards that car. But one of these are equally as good and definitely have a case for themselves, and better in many areas like ride quality, sound, etc. Anyway, I better finish this video because I feel like I've been talking way too much. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. You've enjoyed this fairly in-depth review of my 1200 mile report on Audi's RS6 Avant performance. Until the next time, take it easy and I'll see you then. Cheers.